Morning, everyone. Thank you all for coming this morning at 9 a.m. After there were many different social events last night, so I appreciate you all getting up bright and early to join today's session. Today, we're going to be talking about mainstreaming nature-based solutions. This session will explore how we can mainstream nature-based solutions by creating the right enabling conditions. We'll hear from a number of experts on their work supporting the shift of nature-based solutions from pilot scale to mainstream adoption. Nature-based solutions have been talked about this week a lot as the kind of panacea of our water challenges. And they harness natural systems to manage when we have too much water, too little water, or too polluted water. And in doing so, they deliver much more than just the water outcomes, healthier ecosystems, enhanced biodiversity, carbon sequestration, recreation spaces, but also new opportunities for landholders and farmers to attract investment and diversify rural economies. We've understood these benefits for some time now, and the pilots have shown their effectiveness. Yet mainstreaming nature-based solutions has been slow. Governance is fragmented, policy and regulation often favour grey infrastructure. Financing is sometimes difficult to secure, and delivery at scale is complex. Overcoming these barriers is going to be essential if nature-based solutions are going to become a core part of water management. But it's not all doom and gloom. A recent report by the Nature Conservancy and Global Forest Trends identified that global investment in nature-based solutions for water security have doubled over the past decade, reaching $49 billion in 2023. The aim of today's conversation is to shift from why nature-based solutions to how we enable them at scale. To do this, each of our speakers are going to explore how the enablers that they're working on support the widespread adoption of nature-based solutions. We're going to talk through the governance arrangements that bring actors together to develop catchment plans, policy and regulation that supports nature-based solutions alongside grey solutions, a common value framework that consistently values the broad range of impacts that nature-based solutions have, so that there's a level playing field when we're making investment decisions. We're going to talk about collaboration in the delivery of nature-based solutions, nature markets that connect finance with implementers on the ground, and digital tools that help us to identify opportunities for them at scale. Our speakers today have extensive experience in supporting the delivery of nature-based solutions and working on these enablers. We're really fortunate to be joined by speakers both in the room and also online, and also slightly stressful experience, but all going well. We have David Elliott joining us, who's the director at Ferns Natural Capital Solutions, and Aaron Cox, senior consultant at Arup, who will be speaking to us about governance. Brooke Atwell, associate director at the Nature Conservancy, who's going to talk about policy and regulation. We'll hear about the development of a common value framework from Luke McLaughlin, the ESG strategy manager at United Utilities, and Lou Yang, an associate at Arup. Alex Adams, deputy director of strategy and stewardship from the Rivers Trust, will talk to us about collaboration for delivery. We'll hear about nature markets from Guy Thompson, managing director at Entrade, And lastly, Alex Nixon, an associate from Arup, will discuss the role of digital tools and nature insight. With that, I'm going to hand over to David and Aaron online, who are going to talk about governance of nature-based solutions. Thank you.
Good morning. How do I... Oh, here we go. There we go. Good morning to everyone in the room and hopefully online. And I'm hoping Aaron is online. Otherwise, it's going to be... for the first session, I might be covering his slide, but I'm hoping he's going to be seamlessly introducing his components of this. So, governance around nature-based solutions. You know, in the UK, our rivers, despite a massive investment over the last 30 years and some great progress in the early years, our rivers are largely either stalled in their improvement or in some cases are in decline. And that situation is only going to get worse with climate change and the additional pressures from society on our river systems. And about 2 years ago, the Office of Environmental Protection, the overarching body in the UK, reviewing with the responsibility for reviewing progress against government's objectives, environmental objectives, reported that and commended the incredible investment going into addressing our river health, but issued a warning that a lot of the investment that we are making is misaligned with the pressures on our land. And that is largely because stealing from analogies or terminology for health, our efforts in the UK are largely focused on addressing those point source solutions, those acute pressures that are present in our system, the point source discharges from storm overflows, sewage treatment works, industry and other things. Whereas actually an awful lot of the pressures in our catchment are diffuse or are chronic, and they are largely ignored because we don't have an integrated approach at a local level to understanding how the pressures affect the particular systems that we are operating in. A lot of our investment is determined nationally and then applied like a blanket over at a local level. We all know that catchments have highly different characteristics, and therefore, if you do not address those local characteristics, then you risk that big risk of misaligning those pressures. So, catchment plans are a great solution to that, actually. That's widely acknowledged that the solution to this is we need a system-based approach to managing water, yes, but it also needs to be local. So we need to be able to apply national objectives at a local level, a local lens, by understanding how the pressures affect those particular catchments. And that's where catchment plans have a huge opportunity. And nature-based solutions are one of the best options for dealing with those diffuse issues. A lot of the time we think about them dealing with acute problems instead of grey infrastructure, but actually their real sweet spot in my mind is how they deal with a lot of these diffuse issues where they can address many different pressures in one intervention. So that's why we see catchment plans as the basic building block of any intervention in the catchments and how we integrate nature-based solutions with grey infrastructure at a local level. And so it is our basic unit of planning and implementation and the basic building block. But because a catchment plan can align the pressures locally, it can help work through the trade-offs. That's the other big issue. We do not acknowledge or address the trade-offs, and we need to think in dealing with the trade-offs. We need to think about what are the societal needs of a catchment and what is nature's needs of catchment, and treat them together and understand what the conflicts arise from doing that, rather than ignore the conflicts to the detriment of nature mostly. And we can agree a set of actions amongst the parties who have a responsibility for addressing those pressures, a catchment partnership. and we can identify the funding sources, the numerous funding sources in the UK to address river health. In 2016, we did a report which identified some £13 billion a year spent in England alone on environmental issues. But that was discharged through something like 30 to 40 different agents over 20 to 30 different policy objectives, few of whom talked or collaborated. So there was plenty of money being invested, but it wasn't being invested well. And the catchment plan can start to bring all that together. The key to having a catchment plan as your basic financing unit is that it also then needs governance around it to ensure it has legitimacy and is empowered and is enforceable. And to talk us through that arrangement for catchment plans, I'm going to pass you over to Aaron. Aaron, over to you.
Kia ora, everyone. My name is Aaron, Senior Consultant here at Arup. If we could move on to the next slide, that would be great. Thank you. So going to talk to you about what a catchment plan model could look like. This has been developed in the context of the English water system, but we think it can apply across multiple countries and boundaries. So first off, in terms of important attributes, the plan has to have influence on decisions made by regulators as well as local authorities when it comes to land use decisions. Without this, while the plans will have some effect, they may not achieve the outcomes that they need because they need that regulatory backing. Secondly, as David mentioned, they do need to identify and attract sources of funding, and Luke, Lou and Guy will talk about that later in the presentation about what some options there. And lastly, and quite critically, they do need to commit key actors to action. So the plans will identify a number of actions, and they need to contract the actors to deliver them in order to maintain confidence in the plan and keep the faith within the community that it will deliver. Well, plans will be made, catchment plans do actually have both local, regional and national level components. While they are made and created at the local level, chiefly because people better understand the pressures at that level, decisions on land use and related issues are also made at that level. There are regional national components to it. So they're made at the local level, and it's quite critical that all the key actors are brought together to make that plan and have a role in decision making. At the regional level, the role of the regional level is really to aggregate those plans together and come up with a funding and financing strategy, as well as to support delivery. The aim is not to really relitigate the outcomes that the plans have landed on, as well as the actions, but really to support them be delivered. Because at that regional level, that's where you can get a lot of those efficiencies. And then lastly, at a national level, this is where the government will set high-level outcomes and targets for the water system, which the plans will meet, as well as provide direction and advice and guidance on how key trade-offs can be made and balancing between multiple priorities like environmental, social, and economic priorities can be made. So overall, plans are really important parts at the start of the system, but do rely on the other enablers, which people will talk about later on in the session to effectively deliver NBS. Thank you, everyone.
Amazing. Is this mic on? Ooh, this is my first time using a roaming mic, and it's quite exciting. So thank you very much for that really insightful, I can see Aaron down here, Aaron and David. That was really great to hear about sort of the catchment plans and how they can be designed to, with everything else that we'll talk about later, to deliver kind of better outcomes. To talk to us more about policy and regulation, we have Brooke Atwell from TNC. Brooke is an Associate Director for the Nature Conservancy's Resilient Watershed Strategy, where she works to conserve watersheds around the world by developing sustainable watershed investment programs that meet the needs of biodiversity and communities. No mean feat. So everyone, welcome Brooke.
Thanks, everyone. Good morning. All right, so I'm going to talk to you a little bit about some of the kind of best practices on how to mainstream policy and regulation for nature-based solutions. Louise alluded to this earlier, but a recent report by Forest Trends and the Nature Conservancy found that between 2013 and 2023, global investment in nature-based solutions doubled to reach $49 billion in the last year there. As you can see by this graph, the majority of funding comes from public sources, mostly from national governments. And so when we talk about how to mainstream nature-based solutions, this is one of the barriers that we're facing. We would love to see more investment in NBS. While $49 billion is really great, love that it doubled over the last decade. More needs to be done because that's just a drop in the bucket. There are estimates that say, the water sector spends about $700 billion annually on water infrastructure, and less than 1% of that goes towards nature-based solutions. So there is money there, it's just not really being directed towards NBS. So when we think about some of the barriers surrounding nature-based solutions, NBS are not systematically integrated into great infrastructure, which means that you miss these opportunities for resilience and cost effectiveness. Long-term OPEX funding is still a major gap, especially for monitoring and evaluation. Public funding obviously dominates, as we saw in the last graph, but it is super vulnerable to shifting political and economic priorities. So we were trying to figure out, given these barriers, what kind of policy and regulation should we develop to kind of help us hurdle some of this. So Beyond Barriers is a new report that's coming out in September. It was co-created between the Nature Conservancy, ARUP, CIWI, and IVL, and examines all the laws, regulations, and institutional frameworks across 17 countries that are generally strong NBS implementation, or we consider them to have better NBS implementation than others. And it breaks down these recommendations between the policy design itself and then a common set of executing conditions that can further spur successful nature-based solutions. So we'll start with legislation. Laws are really overarching and set the rules for everything else. They are also the hardest thing to change. And we can really think of it in kind of two buckets. There's water laws and land use laws. So for water laws that enable NBS, they have provisions that provide a structured approach to sustainable water management, and it allocates resources to people, industry, and explicitly mentions ecosystems as part of that. They also clearly define roles and responsibilities for water management across these governance levels, and they mandate, not just allow for, water and sanitation providers to protect water resources. Land use laws incorporate nature conservation goals, and they adapt key principles of integrated catchment management that facilitates collaboration between landowners and basin authorities. Policy and regulation, they really profoundly impact how service providers operate, including how readily they can consider and adopt nature-based solutions. So this is really where we find that there's kind of the most opportunity for change, pretty immediate opportunity as well when you think about it. So at the national scale, NBS policy should focus on long-term performance goals that allow NBS to establish and account for the variability that's inherent in ecosystems. And on those lines, it should emphasize outcomes. It should not specify the technologies or the nature-based solutions that they should use. It should really focus on the outcomes that you're searching for. It should also avoid CapEx bias in economic regulation, which can favor great infrastructure that tends to require significant upfront investment costs rather than NBS, which has typically more sustained OPEX costs. Legislation, policies, and regulations all impact how NBS are funded, and of course the institutional setup that enables that. So for funding, the most important element is really the availability of adequate, predictable sources of funding across these government functions. So dedicated funding for OPEX in addition to CapEx, as previously mentioned, but then also economic incentives to encourage the uptake of nature-based solutions, including subsidies, tax breaks, PES, et cetera, et cetera. They also really recommend simplified application processes, so decentralized funding mechanisms to kind of reduce some of the administrative burdens that are inherent in accessing some of these government funding opportunities. And then risk mitigation strategies like insurance and contingency funds to ensure that projects remain financially stable over time, sort of like crop insurance for nature-based solutions almost. And then organizationally, the most successful institutional arrangements allowed for multiple types of collaborations, whether between government departments or vertically, and then importantly outside of government, so NGOs, private sector, and there's usually some form of community participatory mechanism. And then all of this, of course, is underlined by implementation and social conditions that can more quickly scale nature-based solutions. So, for example, success cases often had the technical capacities or really strong supplier network to develop and implement and then monitor those NBS activities. And then in contexts where nature has maybe greater cultural or spiritual value, NBS were more likely to be seen as a valuable option. And then just to summarize, you can kind of think of it within these 3 C's. So coherence, context, and cooperation. So when we think about coherence, we're thinking about policies, laws, and regulations. They have to coordinate with each other, and importantly, they have to use the same language. People can't guess what you mean between different kind of levels of government as it moves down to the local context. And then some case studies had really incredible policies. On paper, those should scale nature-based solutions, no problem. But the lack of community buy-in or technical capacity actually superseded the policies. And then, of course, cooperation is the last. So NBS, we found, can succeed in really suboptimal policy contexts if there are champions for collaboration who can find ways through the red tape and help to kind of build some of these more substantial delivery mechanisms. Thanks.
Thank you, Brooke. We are now going to hear from Luke and Lou online, who are going to share with us about a common value framework. So Luke is a chartered accountant focused on bringing environment, social and governance, ESG information into company decision making. Lou is a highly experienced sustainability consultant working across sectors, delivering advisory services in benefit valuation, investment planning, and business cases. So really excited to hear what they have to say. Welcome.
Morning, everyone. If you could move us on to the first slide, please. So I suppose a bit of a theme coming out of this morning, and one of the things that we've been looking at in the UK, supported by the Ofwat Innovation Fund, is this programme called Mainstreaming Nature-Based Solutions. So I know the Nature Conservancy, who just spoke, are involved, and also David Elliott and Arup also involved. And I think, for me, it's a really exciting time in the water sector. And one of this project was kind of set up from a place of understanding that there were a number of barriers to nature-based solutions, and particularly to that mainstreaming aspect. So if you move on to the next slide, there's a kind of 5 or 6 work streams that are really targeting how do we overcome those barriers. So the first is around standardization. So how do we understand, if we build nature-based solution A, what benefits will accrue from that particular intervention? There's a funding and financing work stream. So you've heard some stuff from TNC this morning, but how do we channel institution-sized funding into nature-based solutions? How do we influence policy and regulation? How do we make sure that we're approaching these in a collaborative way and working across different organisations, different sectors, different actors within a catchment? We've got a tracked programme of work also, where we're looking at nature-based solutions in current plans and how far along the process are they getting before they're hitting a stumbling block. And all of those are very interesting, but really what I'm here to talk about is the common value framework and how that fits into the picture. So if you move us on, one more, please. And I suppose, so what is a common value framework? What are we trying to do here? So I suppose a common value framework in of itself is really about understanding what benefits come from a given intervention, given solution, what value do those benefits have to the people who receive those benefits? So to communities, to the environment, to customers. And I suppose what we've done quite a lot in our country, in our sector, is do value frameworks and do value assessments across different areas of our planning. I think the problem, or what we're trying to kind of overcome with this piece of work, is that the breadth of those benefits is big enough. So rather than keeping quite a blinkered focus on kind of core serviceability, core kind of customer performance, service focused benefits, how do we broaden that out? How do we include things around biodiversity, around access and recreation? How do we make sure that the wide range of benefits delivered by nature-based solutions are captured? And then the second point on here is probably the most important, or the kind of biggest thing that we're trying to aim at with this common value framework, is the consistency. Because so ourselves up in the northwest of England, United Utilities may value things differently to in the southeast, or to in the centre of the country, or to Welsh Water, for example. So this common value framework is really trying to provide the basis so that we all have a common language in the first instance to talk about these solutions. So we can go to our regulator, we can go to our stakeholders and say, here is the cost benefit ratio of a given intervention, and people can understand what that means on the basis that is underpinned by a common framework. The other thing that we're really trying to encourage is that a value framework is not just a computer-generated answer, but that it's really supporting that decision making and this kind of positive feedback loop of trust and transparency. So the more trust in the common value framework that is put in by regulators, by companies, the more we can invest in assessing benefits of those options, assessing the valuation of those options, and really just this positive feedback loop of understanding what it is that we're talking about when we are looking at the benefits of nature-based solutions. If you move us on one more, please. So I'll hand over to Lou here to talk a bit more about the kind of technical side of it.
Thank you, Luke. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about, so what does the common value framework look like? And we've got a diagram at the bottom of this slide that you can see that give you an idea. Is effectively a lookup table with lots of values that sit in the table. And there are some key terminologies to introduce. So the values would then provided against a list of common outcomes for the water sector. It's kind of our starting point. For usability, we have split those outcomes into different buckets. So performance commitments, those are the things like the more serviceability type of, so that the core functionality of water companies and what they're providing. And there some of the outcomes are linking to wider environmental outcomes. They're linking to what the regulators are they're looking for as well. And then there's this other bucket of outcomes that can also be commonly kind of targeted by water companies, just to help to kind of categorize them and help users to find the most relevant ones to what they're trying to represent using their for their investment. And then sitting a kind of the next level down from the service measures, they are the impact categories. So they're kind of more granularity on so thinking about service measure, this could be drinking water quality, this could be pollution incidents or habitat impacts. So the impact category are there to provide the next level of granularity. So this could either be the severity of impact or could be differentiating the beneficiaries. So is it a I don't know, like a sewer flooding reduction for residential properties or commercial properties, for instance. And then for each one of the impact category, we have something called a unit of measure. So this gives a unit for how that outcome is measured, and then also that provides the context and explain what the value is representing. And then kind of under, so we have a number of buckets where the values are sitting under, we're calling them value metrics, and this is to represent there are a wide range of values that investments can deliver, and we are using the multi-capitals framework to categorize them. So for example, there are natural capital values that can be delivered by water sector investments like water qualities, water resource, air quality, carbon sequestration. There are social capital related values like trust, quality of place, local economy improvement, and also there are human capital related outcomes like skills and health and well-being, and also, for example, intellectual capital gained through investments, routines and practices and know-hows for companies. We're trying to capture across a very wide range of values, and those are providing the headings. And then very importantly, to link the service measures impact categories to the value metrics, we have something called the impact pathways. So these are the matrix that show which value metrics are impacted by each one of the service measures and impact categories. Give you an example, say if we have a service measure that's on pollution and the impact category might be the severity of the pollution, and for each one of those we will be looking at what impact pathway and what value metric that will hit. So we anticipate there will be a impact pathway to quality of place and recreation, health and well-being, trust, etc. So those are where you can see the ticks in the box kind of showing in the illustration below, and the following that impact pathway mapping, the next stage, what we were doing is filling those with monetized values. So moving us on to the next slide. So as Luke has alluded to, this has been quite a wide coverage program that we've been working on, and for the Common Value Framework work stream, we have effectively been working for the past 18 months. And to start with, we have this development phase, and that is kind of then further split into review, define, and develop. So we didn't kind of jump straight into developing a common value framework. We started by looking at what is currently being used, what are the the advantages and limitations of the current approaches, and we have involved the UK water sector in defining. So then, what do we mean by a common value framework, and what do we want to be to have in that? And then we then moved on into the development phase. And through that development phase, we have engaged really extensively with key stakeholder groups in the water sector through various different forums, like the Policy and Implementation Board that is engaging with top level environmental and economic regulator bodies to get their buy-in. And we have the task and finish group that's from the program representing other work stream. We have regulatory check and challenge group that's from regulators again, but more at a working level to really engage with them to shape the common value framework. We have user groups that represents the term indicates that the potential users of common value framework, so they tend to be representations from the utility companies, the water utility companies, and the end users for this. We have engaged with decision support tool groups. So these are the people that tend to be providing the software solutions for the end users, where the common value framework is likely to sit behind or within as part of those solutions. And so where we've got to at the moment, we've got a first draft in March 2025 that went to the user groups and regulatory check and challenge group for the review. And currently we have got a wider consultation that is ongoing. So that started from the 1st of August and it will close on the 15th of September, and we'll have the next iterations of the Common Value Framework to go to the Policy and Implementation Board for their endorsement. And we're very much looking forward to then having that going into implementation activities and having people adopting them and starting to bring some transparency and consistency and improved maturity in value-based decision making, and also in enabling nature-based solutions for the UK water sector. Thank you.
Thank you, Lou. Fantastic. And we now have a short period of 10 minutes for some panel discussion and questions from the audience as well. So I'm going to invite our speakers, David and Brooke, back up on stage, and we should have some faces popping up as well from those online. I'm going to kick us off with one to give you guys some time to form some questions, but then we will be coming out to the floor, so please do have a think. Where should I go? Oh, I'll go in the middle. Yeah, you can go there. I feel like we heard a really nice different levels of scales from you guys, starting out with David and Aaron thinking about what does the plan need, how do you kind of make a credible plan, how do you build those blocks together. From Brooke, we heard about your report where you've looked at some of these policies and plans and seen some really great ones and learnt some good lessons from there. And then we heard from Luke and Lou how they're kind of taking a tool and implementing that to hopefully make some change. We see a lot of ambition, is I think what I'm trying to say here. And this is a question that we might go to each of you very briefly. What do you think is the key thing that's kind of blocking this implementation at scale, in your view?
Key thing blocking the implementation? Sorry.
Yes. What do you think we need to fix to get this ambition and move that forward?
I think when it comes to environmental regulation, in particular in the UK, there's an awful lot of pressure on the regulators to implement the law. And the law is sometimes not particularly helpful to adapting to the pressures that we're starting to see coming through. And we're in danger of being precisely right or precisely wrong, broadly precisely right but broadly wrong in our implementation of alternative approaches. And the Cunliffe Review has identified that actually we need to see more constrained discretion between regulators and policymakers and implementers to allow us to adapt our approaches more suitably and to innovate faster. At the moment, that really precise regulation is inimical to the innovation we require to see and the pace of innovation we require to see. So we need to be more broadly right and less precisely wrong.
Brilliant. Thanks, David. I might go to online, and Luke, I might adjust that question slightly for you and ask, what must the Common Value Framework include to build this confidence and maybe help us to be more kind of broadly right, as David puts it?
Yeah, I love that teeing up from David there, because it's sort of very much aligned with my views on this in terms of we can go to the nth level of detail and find the perfect valuation for absolutely everything and make it incredibly complicated. But the one thing for me that this framework needs to do is have the buy-in from as many stakeholders as possible. So that means regulators are collectively developing it, companies are collectively developing it, consultants are collectively developing it and supporting us in the implementation. So to have that commonality and that agreement on what we mean when we say value, I think will really shift us to that broadly right perspective.
Fantastic. Thanks, Luke. Are there any questions that anyone's burning to ask from the floor? No. Louise?
I'll throw a question there. Brooke, given that no one's asked you one, from the case studies that you've looked at around the world, I think you said there were 17, who do you think's closest to getting this right?
I don't know if I want to answer that, Louise. I don't know. And there were no perfect cases, I'll say that. Every different case that we looked at had different enabling environments and different regulations that kind of worked in some parts and didn't in others. Really, I think it's kind of the combination of all of them. I'll give an example. In Colombia, they have really strong regulation that enables utilities to charge an environmental tariff, and they've been able to raise $30 million for nature-based solutions, but that $30 million is sitting in a nice, beautiful-looking trust fund, and they haven't touched it to implement it, because there is no then resulting provider network on the ground. There's nobody there to say, okay, well, this is now how you develop projects. This is how you monitor and evaluate those projects. And this is then how you report back to your constituents on the investments that you're making. And because the tariff, which like on paper was written very beautifully, but it was very restrictive as well when you kind of look back on it, they can charge and use the tariff for nature-based solutions, and they can use it for monitoring and evaluation. But there's nothing in there about project development or building local capacity, et cetera, et cetera. And so they need technical assistance now from some external body within, the state to come up and say, this is how you actually do this, and this is how you develop and operationalize nature-based solutions investments at scale. So I know that's not answering your question, but I'm not going to favor one country over another.
Thanks, Brooke. Very, very well answered. And I think that makes me think about sort of in a lot of the work that Lou's been doing, it's been about kind of getting a lot of research together and understanding what those kind of metrics need to have in a way that they will be defendable and kind of then well understood by different actors in the space, and then also trusted by different actors in the space as well. So Lou, I wondered if you could talk a bit about that process and how we kind of ensure that the quantification of those benefits is defendable and can be trusted.
Yes, of course. I think one of the key things is knowing who you need to agree those values with. Like what Luke was saying, we were very conscious that we didn't just want to develop a common value framework with lots of values in there that nobody can trust. So it's about taking everybody together on that journey and co-develop and getting people buy into what a common agreement on what we mean by value. And then in terms of the more technical side, when we're pulling together the common value framework, we've always said, okay, our starting point is the UK water sector. And so it's about understanding what are the common outcomes we want to be representing. I guess it's striking the right balance between capturing everything and then ensuring usability. So then we had the common ones, but we also designed in something that's capture sort of a catch-all, so something that to allow more bespoke valuation from specific investments if they had some specific studies to be represented. I guess from a how do we ensure kind of the benefits are the quantifications are defendable perspective, it's firstly being clear on its use. So by creating a common value framework, inevitably we have needed to build in assumptions, and in doing so, we felt the need to be very clear on the use of the common value framework. So where it's best placed to be used in the kind of investment planning process, and being clear on the source of data and limitations and assumptions used. So that helps people to pick it up and interrogate it and be clear on the audit trail. And also, I guess, recognizing it's ever-changing. There's evidence base is moving forward. So I think it will be really important for the common value framework going forward for there to be something like a periodic review to pick up those best practice and ensuring it's always current.
Thank you, Lou. Thank you so much. So my final question is actually going to be for Aaron, and you don't have long, and it's not a small one. But I think thinking about all of that process of collecting different metrics, and one thing that it can probably do is it's better align other sectors and other aims. So water, biodiversity, climate, land use agendas. How can governance and policy better align those things to avoid duplication and conflict? No biggie.
All good. So firstly, I think it's really critical to get all key stakeholders in a room to kind of work through these key issues, and then make sure that the final decisions made, so the plan or the set of actions, is able to be implemented. Because if that isn't done, certain stakeholders will become disappointed and certain sectors may be prioritised over another. Secondly, it's really critical to have a consistent framework or way to work through all the trade-offs, and otherwise one organisation over here might do it in a certain way and one organisation here might do it in another way. And I think that's where it's important for government to come in to set that high-level direction for the system, including how key trade-offs can be worked through. And then lastly, it's just really important to ensure that when these plans are being developed, each key stakeholder and sector, so those representing agricultural interests, biodiversity and environmental interests, and potentially development interests, are all really listened to and are given time to work through those issues, not wanting to ensure that a plan is delivered at pace and overrides the important to come to a consensus, or at least an agreement.
Amazing. Thank you, Aaron. A round of applause for our panellists. Thank you. Brill. We're now going to move on to funding and delivery. And I'm going to invite Alex Adam from the Rivers Trust to come up. Alex, I've got to move my clipboard around and get to who you are. So Alex, hold on. I might need you to introduce yourself, Alex. What I have... Oh, no, here we go. Here we go. No, we're very well prepared, obviously. Alex has worked in conservation for over 20 years, including Natural England and WWF. His work at the Rivers Trust involves development of water stewardship programs with a growing number of corporate partners and the development of a range of pioneering catchment scale restoration projects. He's a member of the Catchment-Based Approach National Support Group, is an Alliance for Water Stewardship expert practitioner and member of the BSI Technical Committee. Welcome, Alex.
Hello. Thanks, Ali. Is this working? Yes, okay. Thank you. I'm here to kind of run through some of the principles or our experience as effectively a deliverer on the ground around collaboration. And I guess in the context of the earlier comments, I'm going to kind of pick up some of the themes about trust, project development, the imperfect landscape that we're working in terms of blended finance, regulation, etc. So we're also part of the mainstreaming nature-based programme. So a little bit about us. I'm just kind of picking up the theme about trust. Rivers Trust UK NGO. We've got 65 local trusts across the UK, England, Ireland and Wales. We're all about happy, healthy rivers valued by all, and we do that by working at a catchment scale through collaborative action with communities, landowners, regulators, businesses, everybody in that catchment, because these issues need everyone to be leaning in to fix them if we want happy, healthy rivers and indeed build the resilience we need for climate change. So that's why we're involved in these conversations, and I think that kind of people tend to understand why we have a place around those tables or why we're walking down their farm drive, because they understand we're about fundamentally fixing their local river, or trying to. I'm going to talk to you about a project that we're working on, my colleagues are working on in the UK, which I think sort of starts to illustrate some of the interesting challenges and opportunities that we've been talking about in the earlier session. So this is a landscape recovery project that we're working on. It's in the Lake District. We call it the Resilient Glendon Mackin programme. Actually, these figures have been updated rather. Project is now £120 million over 20 years. That's the kind of financial forecast. We've actually up to 56 land managers involved now, and it's covering we're up to about 9,000 hectares. So like many of these projects, when we're talking about nature-based solutions and catchment scale restoration, when you start to build a bit of a head of steam, more people get involved, more people start to understand, things start to grow. And just picking up the point around collaboration, this project has come about, and at the macro level, this is a DEFRA-led project, the Department of Food and Rural Affairs, so they did a competition for different projects to do that kind of initiative funding, that pump priming, so we could start doing some of the legwork. Also, a big shout out to Esme Fairburn, who else did some bridge funding because we didn't have enough for project development, and particularly West Cumbria Rivers Trust, who've been working on this really for about 15 years, because the relationships with these landowners takes a very long time to develop. These project opportunities take a long time. The relationships it has with farmers take a long time. So, particularly to the financiers out there, when you go, have you got a shovel-ready project? The answer is almost, but you need a bit of time to work them up, particularly if you have particular criteria. And there is a gap there in terms of that project development. That pipeline, particularly the bigger, more fundable ones, are complicated. How do we bridge that gap in terms of building the capacity and capability on the ground? Anyway, Resilient Glendamachin, we're looking to basically stop flooding in Keswick. Keswick, and I'll come to a photo in a moment, small town in Cumbria. A lot of money's been spent on the flood defences already, and I'll come to a photo. But through the modelling, we know that those flood defences are going to fail due to climate change. Thirlmere Reservoir is also the primary water source for everybody in Manchester. So it's kind of important for everybody. People will know Manchester. It's also an SAC, so at the bottom of the reservoir, it's an SAC river for salmon, which our current prediction, we've probably got about 14 years to keep salmon in our rivers in the UK if we don't really kind of start ramping things up. And it's in a World Heritage Site. Rural part of England, primary water source, lots of flood risks. And what we're trying to do is using nature-based solutions at a catchment scale to reduce those problems, provide multiple benefits, biodiversity, water quality, flood reduction, etc. So, I won't go into the flood risk details because I'm not qualified to do so, but you can see from the graph that through the modelling, we are going to start to overtop these flood defences. And I don't know if everyone can see, but this is a wall that has been installed for flood defences with glass walls on top. You can't really build any, this goes through the centre of town, you can't really build any higher. And I'm not sure how many hundreds of millions this has already cost, but it's quite a large sum of money. So to mitigate this impact, we are looking to work with the farmers further upstream. And we're doing that through hydrological modelling, working out what nature-based solutions need to go where, in order to reduce that flood rate, to slow the flow within the catchment and deliver those wider benefits. But it takes time. The collaboration, bringing the various players together, I've already mentioned the farmers, local authorities, but also the different sources of funding. So in the absence of this, we say, more sophisticated regulatory framework, we are bringing different sources of funding together through a community interest company. So be that through the utilities funding, through some of the regulators, highways authorities, farm subsidies, etc. We are trying to aggregate against a headwind, I have to say. The system isn't designed to help us do this, to aggregate primarily the existing funding that's already there to deliver the right nature-based solutions in the right place and effectively pay those farmers to put the right solutions in place over a 20-year period. And what's quite novel about this system, we're trying to do this on a kind of social enterprise basis, so it's not about investment, it's about primarily taking the money we already have in the system, corralling it together and putting it back, so we're paying, a lot of the problems that we're dealing with in nature-based solutions is because we've extracted them from the system in the first place. How do we put them back in? And how do we keep the resources that we got back in the catchment to make sure we can build the resilience? And we're doing that through a community interest company, where we're bringing the buyers and the sellers together, and I think this is a really important part in terms of collaboration. We talk about transparency, so it's a very transparent model. When this will be set up, we'll make sure that the board of the community interest company will have representatives for the land owning community. It will have representatives from the various different buyers. It will have independent chairs, but the whole thing will be done open source and trusted, so everybody in the community understands what we're trying to do. That in turn, we know from other projects, starts to unlock lots of voluntary in-kind type of activity. So a lot of tree planting will need to be done, restoration work. How do we tap into the local community to provide that support? But this is one model for scaling that up, and let's be honest, it's quite labour intensive. So on that note, I think I'm going to be passing over to Guy to talk about other market mechanisms for scaling catchment restoration. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Alex. You're doing my job for me. So next up, we have Guy, who's Managing Director of Entrade, a pioneering environmental market operator, which is creating and operating high-integrity nature markets in the UK, and was recently established as an independent company and joint venture between YTL UK and Arup. Welcome, Guy.
For that. Good morning, Stockholm. Like Alex, whilst I'm in the delivery box in this event, I have a background in policy and regulation, and just turning to the kind of question of the why are we focused today on the importance of mainstreaming nature-based solutions? What's the role of what's the role of market mechanisms in that context? I just want to sort of reframe a few thoughts that have already been posited by previous speakers. The presentation from Brooke at TNC, great. I'm really hugely looking forward to your forthcoming report on Beyond Barriers. I just wanted to touch on a couple of kind of messages from a UK perspective that would amplify your findings. And just zooming right out, a kind of brief reminder, I think it's really easy to forget in the current political context and all the focus on geopolitics and economic instability currently facing Western economies, the importance of just reframing the urgency of action on nature and climate recovery and the links to the fundamental resilience of our economies, our supply chains, and indeed economic growth. I just think it's worth just going back there because, as Brooke has already set out, I think our existing regulatory models do not lend themselves to enabling us to find ways of financing and delivering environmental ambition, and particularly investment in nature-based solutions, in ways that are efficient and enable and can be reconciled with that need for economic resilience and growth. In a UK context, it's just worth saying we do have, the good news is we have post-Brexit, I would say world-leading legislation actually in the form of the Climate Change Act and now the Environment Act. So the outcomes are sort of effectively, the enduring outcomes have been set. What we lack are the delivery mechanisms and the regulatory framework to incentivise efficient delivery of that ambition. And that's the gap that over the last 5 years I've been seeking to work with policy makers and regulators to address, and in particular to consider the potential critical role of well-designed, high-integrity nature markets in that context. Two brief arguments just to kind of conclude the why piece. The efficiency argument, the need to make better use of existing funding. There's a very significant onus at the moment in seeking to plug the finance gap, which I'll come on to in just a moment, and to catalyse private investment. But we do that onus, I think, misses the need to think about how we make better use of existing funding, particularly in the context of pressures on the cost of living and consumers. And looking at that through a water utility lens, there is a need to find solutions that enable society to pay less for more environmental improvements. And I think that does require a significant rethink in how we regulate, as well as how we finance the delivery of the interventions to drive the improvements. So, I mean, that's been subject in the UK context to an excellent piece of work by an independent economist who looked at the DEFRA system and concluded it needed a complete reset. But from a water utility perspective, importantly, I think we've in a UK context, we've had privatised water utilities that have invested heavily in physical assets to improve water quality, and increasingly even when it's not efficient to do so. So, you know, and of course in a climate change context, many of those asset-based solutions are energy intensive, and therefore, you know, adding to the carbon footprint of those companies. So what we need to be finding is a way for water companies to be incentivised to innovate in their service delivery. And nature-based solutions, I think, are an iconic example of that opportunity for water companies to invest in interventions that are more efficient in the use of that existing funding. So that's one part of it. The second part of it is this finance gap that people talk about. At a global context, The UN's now identified a global £700 billion finance gap to restore nature. In the UK, the Green Finance Institute has looked at that and has concluded there's a gap of a minimum of £44 billion to meet environmental goals in the UK by 2030. And a significant amount of that is attributable to the water sector. So, and the regulators, has in the last price review, has enabled in the determination for the water sector, has allocated tens of billions of pounds to delivering environmental improvements over this next 5 years. So kind of it's not unreasonable to expect that with a more efficient approach that catalyses private finance and enables the water sector to play its part in finding ways to collaborate more effectively with other players in catchments, NGOs like the Rivers Trust, farming industry, housing developers, local authorities, and so on. The environmental improvement targets that the government has set out in the Environment Act could be delivered for billions of pounds less. And then importantly, coming to the role of markets and market mechanisms in this, catalyse private investment to enable a reasonable return on the investment in those interventions. So coming back to the role of markets in all this, market mechanisms are just a tool, right? They're an efficient way of funding disaggregated infrastructure like natural flood management, like SUDs, catchment scale improvements to improve water quality and improve water resilience. And as long as you can baseline and quantify the environmental improvements against that baseline, you should be able to run markets for a range of environmental services. And importantly, we know clearly that nature-based solutions deliver a whole range of environmental services that are currently not valued or indeed paid for by those of us, all of us who benefit from those services. And you can choose to apply that approach at any geography, at a city level, at a landscape scale, or in landscapes, whichever lens you choose. So, I mean, just turning to the role of private investment in all of this. I think the first question of that last session was about the blockers, and we've looked extensively at this in the UK context and concluded that the blockers really do boil down to the role of policy and regulation. The availability capital is not the problem. It's the investment at scale in nature-based solutions is being hindered by the lack of coherence between existing environmental regulation, the nascent incentives for private investment, and the opportunity to invest water company regulated expenditure differently, in particular, and public funding mechanisms. There's very significant grant funding being pumped into incentivising the farm industry in particular. The incoherence of how those systems interact are creating barriers that substantially increase the cost of developing and aggregating nature-based projects to an investment scale. So what's lacking is, in fact, scale, certainty, and liquidity. So having those targets in place is the first step in enabling a more efficient approach. But the role of market mechanisms comes to how you can actually deliver those targets on the ground in a way that's joined up and making more efficient use of the different sources of funding available. I believe I have some slides teed up at this point. Can somebody do those for me, or am I slide free for the purposes of this presentation? Fantastic, thank you. So just briefly on the role of Entrade in all of this. So Entrade started life as a piece of innovation catalysed by David Elliott, in fact, back in his day as a senior director in Wessex Water. It emerged from a piece of innovation in one catchment. But what it has enabled is the piloting of and the proof of in the real world the application of a high integrity market design to demonstrate how well-governed high integrity markets can enable investment in nature-based solutions. And I think it's really important to stress at this point, you know, the role of nature markets are just to provide that tool. They are to efficiently allocate resources to the activities that deliver the greatest environmental, social, and economic benefits. And importantly, in contrast with the voluntary carbon market, the markets should be delivering benefits that are local and therefore more tangible to local communities. They should be creating an ecosystem of opportunities for local economies to participate. So in creating Entrade as a market mechanism, we've been experimenting with how these principles can be applied in the real world. So what is Entrade? It emerged from a piece of innovation in one water utility. It has recently been established as an independent company in joint venture between YTL, the Wessex Water shareholder, and Arup. And we've established ourselves as a market operator, a central counterparty that is essentially de-risking participation in markets for the farmers and landholders who are supplying projects on the supply side, and the businesses who are acquiring the environmental credits generated by those projects on the demand side. And importantly, we've created a piece of governance, an arm's length piece of governance, the Environmental Markets Board, in the absence of any independent market governance in the UK to oversee our compliance with the transparent set of market rules as a market operator. Next slide, please. Thank you. And I mean, this slide essentially unpacks our role as a central counterparty. It's underpinned by by a legal framework and a set of market rules and market instruments I don't have the time to dip into today. But the role of the market, the point about a central counterparty role is that Entrade is not incentivised by the prices or payments traded through the market, through the platform. Its role is it's effectively to operate an efficient market, and it creates additional value and fairness by incentivising buyers to bid businesses to bid for the environmental credits at their willingness to pay, and the suppliers to supply at cost, and taking the surplus generated between those two prices and redistributing that surplus fairly to buyers and suppliers in the form of a discount and a bonus, respectively. So that's the Entrade market model, based on several years now of applying that at a catchment scale into two catchment markets. And the last slide turns to the role of, and I've touched on the role of the Environmental Market Board in that context. I just wanted to touch on the role of digital before I hand to Alex. If you could just turn to the last slide, and then I'll wind up. Thank you. And just to tee Alex Nicholson up on the role of digital in all of this. I mean, in respect of the sort of on the right hand side, that front end part, we have a digital market platform that Arup have built for us based on the use cases we've generated in the real world. But the point is, we're managing complexity, a huge amount of complexity here. So this is what the digital platform does is handle that complexity. So our markets involve housing developers, water companies, farmers, regulators, environmental NGOs, local authorities, and all of those stakeholders have very different needs. And to meet those diverse needs, the markets have been designed to facilitate trade between multiple buyers and suppliers for multiple environmental services in different geographic areas. And that does introduce a level of complexity, but if it's going to be scaled, can only be managed efficiently by digital. So the platform's effectively standardising our market model and helping us to scale up from these initial pilot projects. So that's the front end. It's just creating simplicity and ease of use for participants. The back end is really the key thing, though. Again, without going into the weeds and on the detail of this, but the point is that the experience of the voluntary carbon market has deeply sensitised stakeholders to the risks of poorly designed markets, and particularly markets that aren't properly governed. And in that context, the biggest obstacle we've faced is the very deep distrust in the use of markets to deliver environmental services. And that distrust is based on those really legitimate fears of greenwash and the well-publicised failures of markets, such as the voluntary carbon market and markets elsewhere in biodiversity offset. So market integrity is absolutely essential. digital is a key market infrastructure that enables us to underpins the integrity of these markets. So, for example, we've built market registries in that back end that provide transparency for regulators and local authorities over the source of the environmental credits traded on our markets. So that's it in a nutshell. I'm going to hand to Alex. Just before I do so, I guess the only other thing I would reflect on is the need for a major rethink on funding nature recovery, and our experience of using mechanisms such as these catchment markets has demonstrated how aggregating projects and creating liquid markets for environmental services will attract investment and can ensure value for money. But part of that equation then is about ensuring that public funding for nature is used appropriately, and that public funding increasingly becomes a mechanism to enable a fair and efficient transition to agricultural systems in particular that integrate food production with action on climate and nature recovery, rather than becoming the expectation of stakeholders and the farming industry in particular that it is the only source of funding available to farmers and landholders to facilitate investment in nature recovery. It's important that we rethink the role of public funding, I think, in the context of the role of market mechanisms, as I've just outlined, in bringing together buyers and suppliers to deliver a more efficient approach to realising environmental ambition on the ground. And with that, I will hand to you, Alex, on the role of digital. Thank you.
Thank you, Guy. We will roll. Oh, yeah. We will roll now straight into Alex, who's an associate with global expertise using nature-based solutions and leads the technical development of Nature Insight, which he will talk about now. Welcome, Alex.
Thanks very much. Good morning, everyone. I'd like to just start by saying that my background is in the delivery of nature-based solutions on the ground, and in monitoring the behaviour of nature-based solutions, principally from a flood risk perspective. Over the last decade or so, I've been working with a fantastic team at Arup to make it easier to identify opportunities for nature-based solutions and quantify their benefits so that business cases can be made and schemes can be implemented on the ground. And I'm here today to talk about Nature Insight, which is what this lovely graphic is about. It's a web-based and subscription-based tool that helps mainstream the delivery of nature-based solutions and support organizations to take ownership for understanding their potential benefits so that projects can be funded, engagement can happen early between stakeholders and landowners, and ultimately so that projects can be delivered. If you go to the next slide and click once more to put a little animation on, sorry. So it works by performing a multi-criteria analysis of lots of different spatial layers and combines that with in-depth understanding of nature-based solutions to identify the suitability of 10 different types of nature-based solutions, in this case, in this map across Great Britain. At the same time, it's assessing these baseline data sets to understand what ecosystem services are currently being delivered by the land use on the ground, and quantify what additional ecosystem service benefits nature-based solutions could bring to those in terms of carbon sequestration, habitat creation, and flood risk reduction. And we're soon to be adding a nutrient neutrality component in line with some of the fantastic work that Entrade and other people are doing. The next slide, hopefully, is a video. And this, yes, great, it's working. So this is a video of what the web-based platform looks like. It sits on Scalgo Live, which some of you may have heard of, and it assesses these 10 different nature-based solutions across a 250 by 250 meter grid that sits across the entire country, in this case, Great Britain. And in this example, I'm using the watershed tool to show opportunities to a point in a river system. And you can see how quickly it does this at a range of locations. And some of the information being shown on the right-hand side provides a rapid summary of baseline ecosystem services like the carbon sequestration habitat that's currently in place on that land. Then you can also deep dive into the baseline data itself and what information that holds. Looking at the proposed mitigation summary on the right-hand side, we can see what additional ecosystem services those nature-based solutions bring. And then using sliders, you can kind of thin out the map or put more opportunities on the map to see how investment can change and how the benefits can change with that, some of those numbers changing dynamically on the right-hand side. Then you can reprioritize your map, because we're always analyzing what the potential is for all 10 different nature-based solutions in all the grid cells. So you can reprioritize based on different outcomes if you're more interested in carbon, more interested in water storage, that sort of thing. And and then you can identify individual nature-based solutions if those are the ones you're interested in, or that those are the ones you can fund, for example. And you can edit the map based on site-specific knowledge or preferences. We've also added these design storms and a hydrological model to the platform, which allows for really rapid upfront assessment of what the potential benefits of these nature-based solutions could bring to flood events, because that was kind of where my background came from. And so basically, whatever's being displayed on the map can be sort of absorbed into a hydrological model to show you the kind of baseline and proposed benefit from in terms of a hydrograph. You could then take that information along with the other information on costs and those other benefits to rapidly build a business case for a scheme and start developing the funding models and other market mechanisms that might need to go in place to bring this sort of thing into reality. So if you go on to the next slide, I'd just like to show a few brief case studies about how this all works. So this first case study was based on a local plan that was done for a combined authority in England, South Warwickshire, where we wanted to use Nature Insight alongside some other analyses we were doing to demonstrate to the authorities what the baseline ecosystem services being delivered across their entire kind of combined authority area in terms of the baseline habitat, distinctiveness and the condition of the habitat, and the baseline potential for carbon sequestration, alongside a projected future scenario where they could look at, well, where are the most suitable locations for nature-based solutions, and where are the most impactful locations of those nature-based solutions for delivering additional benefits, combined with other information on things like where they plan on developing new residential and commercial areas, where they plan on connecting transport and energy transfer links and things like that across their combined authorities. This information could be used to avoid needless damage to the environment or needless damage to areas that could provide those ecosystem services in the future, and also could be used to add resilience in terms of flood risk benefits across the years. I'll skip through the next couple of case studies quickly. There's one more which is more focused on flood risk. So case study B, if you go on to the next slide, is about flood risk being generated around a train station at a place in northern England. What we did here was the location didn't lend itself to traditional flood defences, stuff that Alex was talking about earlier. The flood defences wouldn't have been suitable for this type of flood risk being generated. So if you click onto the next slide, we looked at 5 upstream watersheds and then essentially did a catchment delineation, or we broke up the catchment into watersheds, looked at the contributing flow from each of those areas and the nature-based solutions map that was suitable in each of those locations to basically determine where in that catchment system you could slow down water for the ultimate benefit of protecting that train station. And we showed that you could raise the standard of protection using nature-based solutions or other storage measures from a 1 in 20 year to a 1 in 75 year using the nature-based solutions. And the final case study on the next slide, we won't watch the whole video, but basically this is demonstrating that from an urban standpoint, you could focus on a more urban-centric problem, and what the demonstrations going to go through, if we had time to watch the whole video, would be that you can use the Nature Insight tools to edit the opportunity map, add features that you, based on a site visit, have determined are appropriate, and then you could actually go into the hydrological tools within this system to increase or decrease the amount of water you think is appropriate for that type of intervention, and very quickly come up with a scheme that you think could provide stormwater separation or avoid combined sewer overflows for a community at risk. It was just showing a different use case in this case. And to summarize on the final slide, basically this platform, it's a subscription-based platform that sits in Scale Go Live that we wanted to create or make these tools accessible to a wide range of users at an affordable price, so that ultimately people can start using their own site-specific or local knowledge and expertise to bring the tools that we've developed and implement nature-based solutions on the ground. Apologies for going a bit over.
Thanks, Alex. All right, we have 10 minutes left in this session, and we're going to go into a really similar panel than before. We will also be going back out to the crowd, so if you do have any questions for these panelists, please do feel free to jump in. I'm going to start off though, Alex, I like how you spoke about, well, headwind in some of the work that you're doing and some of those challenges. So I guess keen to hear how you support and maintain participation between key actors and keep that kind of momentum going in that headwind that you face.
Mostly dogged determination. It's, I think most of the time, so the project I put forward, Resilient Glendamachin, as I say, the local trust, West Cumbria Rivers Trust, have been working in that community for the best part of 20 odd years. The relationships with those farmers has taken a very long time. You know, this project has developed over a long period. And that's really kind of happened because of the kind of the passion and the commitment of the people on the ground. That's pretty much, you know, despite everything, that's come about. And, you know, one of the current themes throughout the conference has been about, you know, scale and pace and adaptation. You need those, and I'm not just pitching for the trust, but you need these kind of people to do that, and we need to kind of support the people. Headline, dogged determination and passion.
Amazing. Two great things. When we're thinking then maybe about that scale, I might jump up to you, Alex. How can Nature Insight really support us to identify some of those opportunities for scale? Do we think maybe, and I might even bring up another question into it, obviously there's a lot of talk also about really innovative digital tools, maybe things like AI. Do you think that might help us even more, or do you think maybe we should be focusing in a different space? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, well, I mean, Nature Insight is a tool, and we need a whole range of tools to help us do this sort of thing at scale. But yeah, one of the main purposes for building it was to help people see what they might be missing, but also provide some of that upfront analysis so that people weren't frightened by the scale. In fact, one of the reasons for doing it was because more and more opportunities were being presented to us at Arup, where you're moving from a kind of 5 kilometre squared catchment scale, which is a kind of easy scale to walk around and do a site visit, up to 500 or 5,000 square kilometre scale, where the concept of walking around and ground truthing solutions becomes insurmountable unless you've got a huge workforce, like, you know, and kind of foot soldiers on the ground. So digital tools help us in the scale problem because they help provide rules that we can apply fairly across systems. But the data has to be right. If the data you're using isn't correct, then it makes it almost impossible, or you just get a scaled answer, but it's based on a load of codswallop, basically. AI can really help us in these in this work. I mean, we're seeing a lot of AI being used in the generation of land cover maps. You get kind of supported or machine learning techniques converting satellite imagery into up-to-date land cover. And I think that's going to have growing importance over the years, particularly in the kind of accreditation and monitoring and evaluation of the sorts of schemes that markets like Entrade help us deliver. We need to show those people investing in nature-based solutions that what they're investing in is actually being delivered. And so regularly updated satellite imagery that's converted into a kind of outcome using AI algorithms is going to be really important for that sort of thing. We're also seeing it a lot more in the kind of hydrological and hydraulic modeling spaces, the use of AI to improve rapid assessments and bring us kind of more information where we don't have the statistical data to provide all the extremes either way for low flows and high flows. But I've been rambling, so I'll stop.
Thank you, Alex. No, fantastic answer. Guy, I'm going to go really quickly to you. And when we're thinking about, all of these tools and things, how can we ensure that local communities do benefit fairly from the, markets, other tools, and avoid kind of recreating inequalities that might be set up from the system?
Yeah. Comes back to my earlier observation. These nature markets are fundamentally, they should be about efficiently allocating resources to the activities that deliver the greatest social, environmental, and economic benefits. So, and that's about rethinking for government and policymakers. I think rethinking the role of markets at the moment, certainly in the UK context, and I think in most jurisdictions, they are largely seen as a kind of a last resort for offsetting harm. And what we're looking for is a complete paradigm shift in thinking about how these sorts of market mechanisms can be used to efficiently identify, locate, and fund the projects and activities that deliver the greatest benefit for the natural environment. And by definition, that will be creating value for local communities, because there's a whole supply chain of participants in the land economy, on the supply side, and downstream actually in terms of monitoring, verifying, and reporting on the benefits. And the NGO sector in particular is incredibly well placed, the types of capabilities we have in the likes of the Rivers Trust to play that role. Certainly in the catchment markets we have run to date, we've unlocked local housing which has been unlocking development for SME developers, care homes, self-build and the like. By definition, they are we're creating value for local communities. In that respect, created green jobs, enabled green NGOs like the Wildlife Trust to skill themselves up in project development and understand how to make better use of these market mechanisms. So, my vision is fundamentally for a complete paradigm shift in the role of the creation of a whole new sector, actually, in driving investment and jobs into the delivery of nature recovery on the ground. And by definition, if we can achieve that, that's going to be delivering better benefits for local communities.
Yeah, we have maybe 2 minutes left. Are there any burning questions from the audience? Can we do one over here?
This is probably for Alex. In your model, have you looked at whether the accuracy could be used by the insurance industry? Basically, does it accurate enough or give you enough output on the reduced flood risk related to nature-based solutions to allow lower insurance rates for people in the potentially flooded area? Because something I'm exploring, but we've been told there really isn't enough information yet to get to the accuracy level they need.
Yeah, thank you. There's still a few steps I think needed to help us with that. The first step would be one thing that you saw in the demonstration was a reduction in flood risk in terms of a hydrograph. It's good when you know what a hydrograph is, but when you don't, we want to try and it just doesn't help that much. So what we want to do is try and link it with flood outline and flood depth information at a range of different return periods, and so we're working towards trying to do something like that. Then we'll be able to understand the property risk within those flood outlines, and then be able to link the hydrograph that you're reducing to a kind of flood risk outline and depths on the ground. But you can do that as it's not available in the platform. The methodology, the process is something that we've done a number of times, but you need to add more detail to it from industry standard data or statistical hydrological data that you need to do on a project by project basis at the moment. but it's a great question and something that I think is really important.
Thank you, Alex. Right, we're going to wrap up there. Thank you, everyone, for joining. A big thanks again to all our speakers. And thank you all for being here. Cheers.